Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jamie Casap or Jaime Casap, depending on what language you speak. I'm excited to be here. So, welcome to my temporary studio here in Sedona, Arizona. I want to do a couple minutes of a quick background of who I am, what I want to, what I'm working on, and then I want to be able to answer a bunch of questions. So, give me a couple minutes to kind of set the stage here in terms of what we want to talk about. So, first, my name is Jamie Casap or Jaime Casap, depending on what language you speak. I was the Chief Education Evangelist at Google for 15 years. I launched Google Apps for Education into the university space. I launched Google Apps into K-12. And then one of the craziest ideas I've ever had in my life is I launched Chromebooks in education back in 2011. And then a bunch of other things that you know, might not know about. But anyway, so I spent a lot of time working on this idea of how do we integrate technology in education? What does that look like? I recently left Google, or not recently, but last year left Google to kind of work on some of the things that I'm really passionate about, especially around diversity, inclusion, and access, and how do we incorporate all these things with technology. So that kind of sets the stage as to who I am. And my passion for education is personal. I am a first-generation American. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York. I grew up on welfare and food stamps with a single mother, all in a very violent community. I'm talking about Hell's Kitchen from the 70s and 80s, not the one that you find, today it feels like it's going back to that. But it was the old days, the old 70s and 80s in New York City. Now, my passion for education comes from this idea that the reason I get to talk to you and I get to have the life that I've been able to have is because of education. And the problem that I'm trying to solve, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but the problem I'm trying to solve is to create opportunities and experiences for other students who are growing up the way I grew up, because I don't get to meet a lot of people with my background in positions of power and influence. And I think that's what it's going to take to really change things, to really change society. Jobs are not going to change things. Structural, systematic things that we need to do are going to change things. So that's kind of where my focus is and where my passion is. Now, I want to start by kind of setting the stage here. And again, I'll be able to answer questions in a couple of minutes, but I want to start with this idea, and I was listening to the program so far, but this idea around where we are today. And let's talk about digitalization. And what I mean by digitalization, I mean everything that has to do with technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, AR, VR, automation, robotics, any of those things, right? That to me is digitalization. And what we need to understand is that we are at the very, 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 very beginning of this. I hope I emphasize that enough. I mean like cavemen and women with sticks and trying to light a fire. Right. So, I giggle when I read articles or see articles about Zoom fatigue or too much technology or how technology is integrating into our life. Like we have no concept of what's coming. And I'll give you an example. Google had a breakthrough in quantum computing right before I left last year. And the best way to describe the breakthrough in quantum computing is like this. If you took one of those mathematical equations and that spin forever and you fed it to a supercomputer, it would take that supercomputer 10,000 years to process that equation, right? The breakthrough that Google had with quantum computing is that they did it in 200 seconds. 10,000 years versus 200 seconds, right? So as much as we talk about, we see technology in everything that we do. We see technology integrated in work and life and everything. We're using technology right now. What's happening with self-driving cars and the fact that 4.5 million people in this country make a living driving things, but you can buy a self-driving car today. When we think about all this integration with technology and we think we're on a cutting edge system, we think that technology has become this big part of our lives. What we need to understand is that we are at the very beginning of this, and it's an important factor to think about, right? So because As much as you think the latest and greatest technology is that you have, here's another way to think about that example that I just gave you, which is that in 2019, and in technology years, that's like 27 years ago, but in 2019, Google's quantum computers was 158 million times faster than the world's fastest supercomputer. That's a big number to try to understand. But think of it this way. Everything that you see with technology right now, everything that you see with your processors and everything that's processing all kinds of different things with computing, you need to understand that everything that you see right now is 158 million times slower than what's coming. That's the world that we're living in. And what we need to, the reason I bring this up is because when we look at education and we think about what we need to do in education, we have to ask ourselves a very simple question, which is, if we are teaching students things that we know machines are going to do better, are we failing our students? I think we are. So I think what we need to do, and this is going to sound ironic when we're talking about technology and digitalization, what we need to do is not worry about technology at all, but double down on what I call human skills. And by human skills, I mean problem solving, creativity, the ability to learn, collaboration, critical thinking, right? Those things. I was listening to the program and I heard some of the speakers talk about it as, as 21st century skills. I don't like the phrase 21st century skills because one, we're 21 years into the 21st century, and two, it feels like it's a phrase that we use to talk about the future, right? Like 21st century skills for the future. No. My 6-year-old needs those skills now, right? And so another trigger phrase for me is when you call them soft skills. They're not soft skills. They're absolutely essential skills. They are. I'm 53 years old. I've yet to master any of those skills, right? So those things, and why I bring those up is because I could care less what my 6-year-old learns, right? So I want her to she's starting first grade, and I want her at the end of it to be able to read better. I want her to be able to write better. I want her to have more advancements and ideas around, how she thinks about things, right? And I want her to understand math. And don't get me started on math, but not math as a subject, because math is not a subject. There is no subjects in math. Math is life. My 6-year-old knows and understands that math is in everything. Everything includes math. Everything involves math, whether it's man-made or natural. Everything has a mathematical formula, an equation to it, and she sees math that way, not as subjects, but as she advances her math skills, she advances her knowledge of how the world works, period, right? That's what math looks like. So I want her to know that. Now, besides that, I don't think I could care less what subjects she learns. As a matter of fact, I would love it if she drove what those subjects were. If you wanted to teach her, if she wanted to learn about, the ancient art of, Chinese shoelace tying in the Ming Dynasty, that's fine. If she wanted to learn about the history of candles in Europe, I don't care what the subject is. What I care is that she's learning those skills while she's learning those subjects, that she's learning how to problem solve and critically think and collaborate and be creative and knows how to learn, right? Those are the things that are the most critical because the subjects do not matter. We have access to all the world's information, and so we can learn any subject we want at any given time. And if we have those skills, we can learn them in even a better way. So that's what we need to focus on, right? Those critical things. Now, before I start answering questions, I want to talk about two things about that, right? Number one is the ability to learn. Because it's important to understand that I do not mean the ability to learn in the traditional education system, right? Which is the ability to take tests, the ability to outline things, the ability to study. That's not what I mean by learning. That's not learning. I mean the ability to learn starts with a self-awareness, which is I don't know how to do something. Where can I go learn how to do it? And then how do I know whether I've learned how to do it? That self-contained ecosystem of learning. the ability to learn. So for example, I talk to adults all the time who say things to me like, you're very creative, I'm not very creative. Or they'll say, and I hear talk to educators who say, I'm just not good with technology. I'm not tech savvy. And my response to these folks, and these are usually college educated, PhD educated folks, in my networks, I say to them, and this is why I don't have a lot of friends, no, you've chosen not to be creative. You've chosen not to be good with technology. These are choices that you make. Because the ability to do those things, the ability to learn those things is out there. You're just choosing not to learn them. And that's okay, but as long as you start with that mental state of I'm choosing something. So for example, another way of thinking about it is I will never say I'm a bad cook. I will say I've chosen not to be a good cook. There's a mental shift that happens when you think about the world that way, because I have chosen to spend my time with other things and not learning how to cook. But if I chose to do that, then I could do that. So this idea of learning how to do things and the ability to learn is critical. And then the last thing I'll say, and I heard the speakers talk about this, and I heard about the workforce development and preparing students for jobs of the future and talking about the next workforce. There's a lot of things that we can get into with that subject, because I don't think that that's the world that we're looking at. And you're starting to see some of that in the business world. But I want to make sure that we are asking students questions. We're asking students the right questions. So for example, we need to stop asking students what they want to be when they grow up, and instead start asking them what problem they want to solve, and making sure that they're solving the most important problems that they're passionate about. Because the second question is, how do you want to solve that problem? And then the third question is, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? So those are the most important things that we need to focus on. Now, I want to see if we have any questions. If we don't, I have other things that I want to cover, but let's look at the questions and see what we have there, if we have any. We have no audience questions. Perfect. I get to talk more. Okay, so let's do this. Let's leave that screen up. If we have questions, I will start asking. I'll start answering those questions. But I want to talk more about this idea of the asking students the right question, right? So this concept of asking students what they want to be when they grow up doesn't make sense, because look, when I graduated from high school, when I graduated from college, when I graduated from graduate school, there was no way any of those things could prepare me to work at Google and have a career on the internet. Because when I graduated from those things didn't exist. There's just no way to think about that. I'm working with people, and I'm working on projects and in industries and in jobs that you don't even know about yet, right? So this idea of asking them what they want to be when they grow up doesn't make any sense. So instead, what problem do you want to solve? What problem do you want to focus on? Because that is critical. Now, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're focused on is that we focus on our students. And we don't do a good job of this at all, which is getting them to understand who they are and what they're passionate about and what their skills are and what they're good at. So what problem do you want to solve? The second question is, how do you want to solve it? And that's an important question, because if someone comes to you and says, I want to solve climate change, you might say, climate change? Oh, you need to go study STEM. You need to go study science. You need to go get a degree in global sustainable development or environmental studies. And yeah, there are millions of ways to solve that problem on that path. But what if that student is a gifted photographer? What if that student is a gifted educator? That's what they were born to do. The way they can solve that problem is by going out and documenting climate change, telling stories about climate change. If they're a gifted educator, the way they can solve climate change is by going out and creating educational programs or experiential programs around climate change. There's millions of ways to solve a problem. So how do you want to take your angle to solve that problem? And then the last question, and this is where it all ties into it, is what do you need to learn to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? I see we got a question here, and I want to hide my my column here so I can see the whole question. How do you propose the issue of getting life skill curriculum back into our schools, specifically urban areas where they have been taken out? Yeah, look, life skills is an important element to this, right? And especially for students who are growing up the way I grew up. And yeah, we need to be able to teach them basic things. But again, all this information on how to do this stuff is out there. For example, one of the things I often talk about is this idea of digital skills. We need digital leaders. We have done a bad job with this generation in talking to them and teaching them about digital skills. We have failed this generation. We have lied to them. We say, you are good with technology. You're naturally gifted. You were just born using technology. And they just don't know how to use it. When you look at the data and you look at a Stanford study from 2019, where 1 out of every 4 high school kids can't pull out the fake story when presented 4 stories, like we need to teach them at the core, at the very beginning, how to be strong digital leaders so that they can have access to all the information, so that they can take advantage of all the skills and all the information that's out there. How do you address the issues of D&I and the difference of Black and brown people in technology companies? Yeah, no, look, that's a huge issue, a huge problem. I think one of the most important things to think about is to look at it from a different perspective. So, for example, again, I heard a lot of talk about the workforce development. What most people don't understand in the business world is, and I've studied this generation, and I have one. I have a 20-year-old. I have a 28-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 6-year-old, because I only like one kid at a time. And so I know this generation, my 20-year-old's generation. And what most people in the business world don't understand is that 70%, and that's like 3 different subjects, 70% of this generation doesn't want to work for you at all. At all. They want to do their own thing. They want to have purpose. They want to drive their thing. So the DEI question for me, and I've been saying this for years, is when a student comes to me, especially a Black or brown student, especially a student growing up the way I grew up, when they come to me, and I speak to students all over the world, but when they come to me and they say, how do I get a job at Google? My response is, forget Google. Don't get a job at Google. Start a company that Google buys, right? And so it's a different format to think about. You want DEI? Fine. Let all the technology companies go out there and create all the programs that they want. I could care less. I want to work with students and give them the skills and abilities to start Google, to get to the next level, because that's what's going to change our communities. Can you apply the asking kids what problem they want to solve to the concept of digital media production, training, and institutions? Yeah. So my daughter, my 28-year-old is she's a video editor. She's a producer. She works at CNN. She makes some of the best fake news you can find. And she is talented, unbelievably talented at the idea of storytelling. So the problem that she's trying to solve is going out and creating a pathway and opportunities for other women, for other lesbian women of color, to play in that role, to play in that game, to create that. And what she's experiencing is that she is a superstar in that space because of her perspective, because of her point of view, because of the way she sees the world. And that's the problem that she's solving, is creating pathways for girls and women who are interested in playing in that digital media world. And she's doing an amazing job. And there's lots of young women who look up to her because she is on the cutting edge of doing this kind of work. So what excites you most about the future of tech and how it can expand the Connect Students network of support even more? Yeah, look, Here's what excited me 15 years ago when I started at Google, which is this idea that when I was 11 years old or 12 years old, and you asked me a question like, what happened on December 7th, 1941? And if I didn't know, I'd have to say, I don't know. I'm going to go find out, and I will come back to you tomorrow and tell you. Now I have instant access to that answer. What that means is that I don't have to focus on that anymore. I can now focus on the next level of that learning. I don't have to memorize things. I can learn. And so that's what excites me about the opportunity of technology. Also the ability to connect, also the ability to create things. Look, this is not the matrix. This is not machines versus humans. This is machines and humans collaborating and working together to solve problems. And that's what excites me about technology, is that, again, we are using technology that is 158 million times slower than what's coming. And that's just as far as we can see, because I guarantee you that once we get there, we'll look at that technology and say how ancient that technology is, or how primitive that technology is, to what's coming 10 years after that. What is the most profound answer you have heard when asked students what problem you want to solve? You know what? Here's the thing about that question. What's profound to me is every answer. Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking to me to hear adults say, "Well, we can't ask kids that question because they don't know what problem they like." First of all, I'm not even talking about the problem. It's the process of problem solving. It's the process that you go through when you identify a problem and come up with solutions, and you iterate those solutions, and you keep working on the solutions. So the problem doesn't matter. It's the process that you learn. But there is not one student that I've asked that question to that had an answer to it that has shocked me in any way, because it's at their core. Now, some students might say, "I don't know what problem I want to solve," and that's a fair answer. And so then the next thing is to go focus on what that answer is, and how and understand who they are. Back to my daughter, the film editor, when she came to me when she was starting college, this is the problem, is that these students don't know themselves. And if you look at and you reflect on yourself and you ask yourself, did you really know yourself when you were 16 years old or 17 years old or 18 years old? And when my daughter came to me to when she had to pick a major in college, she said she was going to be a business major. And I said, business major? I was shocked, because this kid had been making movies on any device since she was 5 years old. And I said, no, I'm not paying for a business major. And no parent ever believes me, but I say, if you want to be, if you major in film, if you get an art degree, I will pay for that. And she did, and now she's killing it. Now, my 20-year-old came to me last year and said, I want to be a political science major. And I said, you don't even know who the governor is. No, you're not going to be a political science major. Like, kids don't know themselves. So we should spend a lot of time helping them understand who they are and what they're good at and the skills that they have. And all of us who are old dinosaurs like me, we can look at our lives and what we're good at and our skills, and we can say, man, I wish I knew I was good at this 20 years ago. We have all the tools that are necessary to help our students identify, what are they good storytellers? Do they like detail? Are they strategy focused? We have all types of assessments where we can help students do that. Now, I'm running out of time, so I want to close, with this idea. When back to answering that kind of question around, what's the most profound answer that I've heard answering that question, and the most profound answer I heard to that question comes from my 6-year-old. When last year I asked her, "Hey, what's the problem that you think about all the time? What's a big problem that concerns you?" And she said homelessness. And she said she doesn't like to see homeless people and doesn't understand why we have homeless people. And she wants to solve that problem. She's 5 years old. And all she needed to do was sit in the back of the truck, see a person standing by a highway entrance with a sign that says, "Please help," to know that that's a huge problem. That's what we want to get to. So we want students, by the way, again, this generation of students who understand things at a level that we can't even comprehend yet. We want them to focus on what they're passionate about. And then our job is to teach them the skills that they need to know to go solve those problems that they're passionate about. So with that, I will conclude. If you want to continue the conversation, hit me up on Twitter. My message button is open at @JCasap. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm creating a lot of content. I'm actually filming this right now, which will be up there someday. So lots of cool stuff there. Let's keep the conversation going.